Evergrande collapse. China now versus the US during the GFC. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ainslie Insights, brought to you by Ainslie Bullion, Ainslie Crypto, and the Gold and Silver Standard, as the Ainslie Group celebrates 50 years. Today, welcome back Alex, who's been exploring what we originally thought might be inevitable, but has now been confirmed, the collapse of Evergrande. How are you going today, Alex?
I'm going very well. How are you today?
I'm going
Different
very well
background, I'm
indeed. Yeah,
told,
you're
too.
different background every week at the moment. You're everywhere. Can you maybe start us off today? It's an interesting story. We've actually been following this for a long time because it has taken a long time to unfold, but catch us up on what's been happening with Evergrande. Is this the big question everyone's really asking, is this China's version of what happened that sparked the global financial crisis?
Um, I'll go through the background of Evergrande and then we'll jump into the similarities with the GFC.
Yeah.
Back in August 2021, Evergrande is China's biggest producer of houses. And in August 2021, they were unable to pay their subcontractors. So they've got 1,200 odd projects, and on quite a few of those, everything ceased because they couldn't make payment to suppliers. Then in September, they have 305 billion in debt. Around $1 billion was falling that month, and they could not make that payment. So if you can't make $1 billion payment on a $305 billion debt pile, things are looking pretty shaky at that point in time. October 21, there was a suspension on their trading. It fell by 10%, but last minute they were able to make that payment of $1 billion, which kind of staved off where they were. November 21, and this should have been when everyone paid attention and probably tried to get out of everything they possibly could. The chairman reduced his shareholding from 77% to about 68%.
And it makes you wonder how that's even allowed to happen in that environment. But anyway.
I agree, because the next month, which was December 21, Fitch then called them insolvent. So, because they defaulted on a $100 million payment. Forwarding a bit further, March 22, the banks confiscated all their deposits, which at the time was around $2 billion. January 23, auditor resigns. March 23, they declared that they're going to restructure. July 23, the auditor and audited accounts finally come out and they declare a $66 billion loss. So that debt pile is growing very quickly. And then basically fast forward a little bit to December, the vice chairman was arrested on criminal charges, and they tried to get their lenders to agree to a restructure. It failed, and finally the Hong Kong court a couple of days ago put them out of their misery and said, right, let's liquidate. So that brought us to where we are now. They are liquidating around $305 billion worth of debt. It's held all over the world. It's huge. And that's obviously grown because it was 305 in August 21.
Yep.
So just the interest on that would be huge by this point in time.
So is that similar to what we saw with the GFC? Because it sounds like there's some rhyme there.
So the similarities are that in the US, there was a property bubble. In China, there was a property bubble. The thing that probably fueled the US bubble the most was the fact that they had these lending rules where you could borrow and speculate on houses, and then if you were in negative equity, hand it back to the bank. So that exacerbated, I guess, probably the drops in prices that were seen in the US.
Yep.
So that's the difference. The bubble is a similarity, but another similarity is the fact that during these bubbles, there was an overproduction of houses or units. So that equated to about 3.5 million units in excess, which was around 3% of the US market. So they have the number of people per household in the US are around 2.6 per household. There's 300 million people during that time. So there was about a 3% excess with a 3.5 million unit excess. Fast forward to China's bubble. It's been let to brew a little bit longer, and especially because the Chinese like to invest in property. So their bubble, they have an excess that's estimated at 65 million units. Now,
Mm.
it sounds like a lot, but we all know China's got a much bigger population
Yeah,
than
right.
the US.
Relative to, yes, yeah.
And their average number of people per household is around 3. Go through all the numbers. Their excess is actually around 13 to 14%. So this bubble is far bigger than the US ever let it get to.
Right.
The finance side of the US made it collapse faster, but this bubble has grown so big that they have to absorb 65 million units on a dropping population.
So that's concerning. Like when you say it's bigger than what was sort of the cause of the GFC. So does that, I mean, the logical next question then is this isolated to China? Is this different from that angle? Because obviously, when this happened in the US, the spillover was fast and everywhere. Is this something that happens similarly, or is it different? Are there different dynamics at play because China is not the US? So, what do we expect if we're the rest of the world? What sort of time frame do we expect if there are going to be spillover effects? How do you see that aspect of it?
Okay, so right now, in a lot of Western countries with these crazy immigration policies, we actually have the opposite issue where housing is still growing in value. There are not enough houses. There's not been enough
Yes.
built. So the spillover, like in the US, when property prices dropped in 2007 because of the GFC, that flowed over into Australia because the same thing had kind of been happening everywhere because there was speculation everywhere. But the similarity is the debt was being held by everyone. So China's debt is being held by overseas buyers, but more so internally to China, whereas in the US, there was a lot held overseas. So there was more of a worldwide spillover with what happened during the GFC. So will the spillover be as big? No, but China has to absorb 65 million houses. It took the US 4 years to do it at a 3% bubble on a growing demographic. So their population rose 15 million during that time. Well, China's demographic is shrinking. So it just spells disaster, more so for China, but there is debt held overseas. There are people that have speculated, but unfortunately it is isolated more to China, so it's less likely to have a big effect overseas.
So do you think, because this is something that I look at a lot when I look at the global liquidity situation and, clearly the big players are the US and China when it comes to pumping money into the system. And the US has started to do that through the backdoor ways we've talked about, not directly quantitative tightening like they said they were. They're sort of cheating the system a little bit. So if we look at China in this situation, surely that means the policy response is going to be substantial, because do they really have a choice? Like, do they really have to pump more money in the system to try and support this? How do you think China will look at resolving that? Because you paint a pretty bleak picture of what's coming for them.
So the two ways that this could be fixed is the population of China grows, which isn't going to happen because
That's
we've had a one-child policy for so long. They could try and get immigration, which again, I don't think they're going to do. You could shrink the size of the household. So if China was actually to be at the same level as the US, about 2.6 people as opposed to 3 people per household, they'd actually absorb the whole excess of housing. So that they could be, but Chinese also like to live with their family. That's more normal than Western cultures. So it's really westernizing a culture that doesn't want to be westernized. So they're your possible policy fixes. The other side is you have to get Chinese people who are so heavily invested in property to start investing in other things. Like in the US, the S&P is a similar size to their property market. So as far as wealth goes, people are investing in both. In China, it's around 70% have invested in houses or property. That's their mentality. So there's also the possibility that the Chinese government tries to start inflating. If I was the Chinese government right now, I would be looking at the stock market and ways to inflate or get companies to list on the stock market so there's other investment vehicles, and start putting money into that side of the economy to balance out what is going to be a very tough time in property.
And that, like, I'm thinking forward and going, isn't that interesting? Because you can almost see a decade into the future, the seeds of the next bubble in this country, because whatever response they take, whether it's convincing people to change their investment focus or, whether it is, even though I get what you're saying, that, culturally, you might not have people wanting to change the people per household number. But if that starts to happen, whatever happens, it creates the seeds of the next bubble down the line when you've got the necessity of the government sort of pushing and saying, well, we have to do this because otherwise we're in a pretty bad situation.
And look at the S&P today, record highs. It's
Yes.
kind of what's happened over in the US. And there's such a divergence between the US market and other markets now. You kind of wonder if that's exactly what's already happened somewhere else.
Yes, true. Well, fascinating discussion as always. Thank you for that today, Alex. Another one from a slightly different angle that's really interesting to think about. So thank you.
Scary big bubbles.
You do like scary big bubbles. So, well, history and scary bubbles are sort of your theme of the year, I think. So we'll keep going with that.
Fun. I
Thank
love
you so much. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll chat again soon.